All right, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, the 18th day of February 2026. You are listening to Breaking Health Barriers with me, Dr. Jack Stockwell. I will be here for a couple of hours with you this morning. I need to put that on mute. All right. It doesn't look like there's a very strong recording signal, so I don't know how loud I may or may not be right now. I know I'm okay on the stream. And Scott, when I say the stream, what I'm referring to, of course, is the streaming broadcast on Facebook or YouTube and X, not KTalk. All right, so there's several things I want to talk about. Can coffee possibly be good? And I've been asked by coffee drinkers of KTalk Radio to address this comment. The vaccine immunity, the inability for an injured person who has suffered from vaccine injuries to sue the manufacturer of the vaccine. And what's being done now to take down that wall of immunity. Can grain cause schizophrenia? In the amazing amount of science that's out there right now, where schizophrenia may be nothing more than grain poisoning. And what is the best diet? So we got several things to talk about in this 2-hour period. I am very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of the KTalk lineup. And what about another couple of weeks? I'll be starting my 32nd year. Van has been on longer, and Linda has been on longer, but I can't think of anybody else who's a regular participant as a talk show host longer than that. So, with that having been said, I just want to make it very clear I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this program. Now, like I said, I'm watching in front of me here the recording passing by in front of my eyes, and it's barely registering at all. So again, I don't know how loud I may or may not be. But anyway, let's get on with this. Senator Rand Paul introduced legislation to end the liability shield for vaccine manufacturers and allow people injured by a vaccine to sue the drug's manufacturer. Now, he's kind of breaking rank with the people who are controlled in Congress, who are controlled by Big Pharma, which is the medical doctors. There are medical doctors in the Senate. There's medical doctors in the House of Representatives. And of course, they usually side with Big Pharma, not necessarily the free rights of the citizens they represent. But they go, most of our members of Congress, this isn't, I don't mean to pick them out as something special. Most of the congressional representation, Senate or House, of course, are owned by the lobbyists. And they will vote according to the money that's given to their campaigns. The idea of Mr. Smith goes to Washington is over with a long, long time ago. However, there are a few standouts, not the least of which is Senator Rand Paul, who is a medical doctor. Now, the End the Vaccine Carve-Out Act is a U.S. Senate companion to the U.S. House of Representatives bill introduced by Representative Paul Gosar back in July under the same name, and the House and Senate bills share essentially identical texts. And Rand Paul said in a statement at the Defender, and you can get this at the Defender yourself, that people harmed by drugs can sue in court. When it comes to vaccines, and in many cases the COVID vaccine, the rules are rigged. You funneled into a federal no-fault program that limits standards, restricts your options, in many cases, he says, leaves people without real justice. So if you have been injured by the GLP-1 weight loss drugs, semaglutide or tirzepatide, you can sue. If you've been injured by drugs for the eyes, drugs for the livers, drug for the heart, the kidneys, whatever, You can sue. But if you've been injured by a vaccine, you can't sue. Just think about that. Now, Senator Mike Lee from our state of Utah said this in agreement with what Rand Paul is doing. Senator Lee said this: pharma giants are hiding behind legal protections to avoid being sued by Americans experiencing serious vaccine side effects. Americans have a constitutional right to a trial by jury. Current laws, big pharma players, to dodge accountability and bar victims from pursuing their cases. Many of these patients are forced to get vaccinated or lose their jobs during the pandemic and are now dealing with permanent and very serious complications. Our bill will end these unconstitutional vaccine carve-outs so that all Americans can receive the justice they deserve and hold big pharma accountable. Now, if it's passed, it would reform the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program so that people who suffer vaccine-related injury or death can sue the vaccine manufacturer in state and federal court without being forced into filing the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, according to a press release that was shared with the defender, and that's where I'm getting this. And as of press time, the press release has yet to be published. But the bill also strips away immunity shield from the makers and the providers of COVID-19 vaccines that was established under the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, the PrEP Act. And the bill would amend the PrEP Act by excluding COVID-19 vaccines from the definition of covered countermeasures. So the bill that was introduced on February 11th by Rand Paul was referred to the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. The bill is backed by a coalition of over 40 different groups. The End of the Vaccine Carve-Out Act, backed by a coalition, as I said, of 40 groups of medical freedom advocates, including the Children's Health Defense, Brownstone Institute, MAHA, Action, Moms Across America, and so on. And commenting on the bill when it was reintroduced in the House last July, the CEO of Children's Health Defense, Mary Holland, said it was long overdue for Congress to address this nightmare. So if the vaccines are truly safe, she said, then there's no reason for them to be exempted from liability if and when they cause harm. Congress passed a law, and an increasing number of vaccine manufacturers faced costly injury lawsuits in the 70s and 80s, according to the College of Physicians of Philadelphia's History of Vaccines website. It says this: in this environment of increasing litigation, mounting legal fees, and large jury rewards, many pharmaceutical companies left the vaccine business. By the end of 1984, only one company still remained. The DPT vaccine and other vaccines were also losing manufacturers. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin said he supports ending blanket immunity from liability for vaccines. He said, it made sense in 1986 when there was a risk of having no vaccine manufacturers, but extending that protection to all new vaccines has led to an explosion in the number of vaccines without adequate safety testing or monitoring. Senator Johnson, let me tell you this, there is no vaccine safety, let alone adequate. So Gosar said he strongly supports Paul's bill, and they don't have to do safety studies. They don't have to do safety studies because they can't be sued. So why waste money on a safety study? Let's make another vaccine. So this happened in 1986 under Ronald Reagan. And because of the massive lawsuits, as this article I'm quoting from here in the Children's Health Defense says, due to the large amount of litigation and excessively high payouts, jury payouts for those injured, the vaccine companies stopped making vaccines. They just kept making their other drugs. And they essentially said, they sent their armed forces to Congress saying, we will stop making vaccines altogether and it will be your fault if you continue this. So Congress got together in this vaccines, the Nutritional Safety Act, I forget the exact name of it. The vaccines were listed. But they were shielded from prosecution. They had immunity. And then that's when the vaccines exploded in the marketplace. And then, of course, came all the hoopla and the drama that came along with it because of all these diseases that could be saved by simply getting these vaccines, these untested vaccines, untested in the sense of safety. And then, of course, vaccine side effects exploded, which couldn't do anything about it because Congress gave the vaccine manufacturers immunity. Imagine the auto industry being immune from litigation because of some failure of the vehicle, or airlines being made immune to prosecution, or food companies being made immune to prosecution, or hospitals, or doctors, medical doctors, or chiropractors, or naturopaths, or physical therapists, or dentists, or anybody else being blanketed over with the inability to sue them for malpractice. There's only one industry that has that, and it's the vaccine industry. And so there are movements now in the House and in the Senate to stop them being shielded from prosecution. Now, of course, the pharmaceutical industry is one of the largest representations of lobbyists in Congress. And the lobbyist sets an appointment to take the congressman or the chief of staff of that office or whatever else out to lunch, out to dinner, to lobby them to make sure that they stand where they're supposed to stand on a particular piece of legislation. If they don't, they're not going to get any money from the pharmaceutical companies for their reelection. I mean, this is so obvious what's going on here, that your vote can be bought and sold by these varying lobbying groups. Now, I know this isn't news to you. I know you understand this. It's just so in your face. So Representative Gosar from Arizona said, referring to Senator Paul's bill, he said, no product should be shielded from accountability simply because it's labeled a vaccine. Americans deserve equal protection under the law, full transparency, and the right to seek justice when harmed. He said that this act restores fairness, strengthens trust, and puts patients, not special interests, first. And Attorney Ray Flores praised the bill for raising awareness of vaccine injustice. Flores said that the U.S. Health Secretary, Bobby Kennedy Jr., could remove the liability shield for COVID-19 vaccines with a stroke of a pen, simply by removing COVID-19 vaccines from the PrEP Act's list of covered countermeasures. Wouldn't even take an act of Congress to do that for the COVID-19 vaccines. He said, unfortunately, bold support appears necessary to empower him to do what he already has the power to do. So I think Kennedy probably is just making sure he's got enough support in the House and Senate before he tries something like that. Because I'm of the opinion that, oh, the volume just went up. Good. I assume that's you, Paul. Thank you very much. I assume that the actions on both the House and the Senate to turn this thing over is going to weigh very heavy on Bobby Kennedy's popularity. I think he's more of a hit target than Trump. Trump is pretty well played into the deep state. So I don't think Trump has anything to worry about it. It's not like he did when he was running for president. You don't see any attempts like that because he's pretty well playing the game. He does exhibit from time to time some sense of autonomy, and there is this part deep in my heart and my brain that I think he still may be a master, not just a player. And that he is setting up several different people before he slams the door shut. Part of me that hopes that's true. And he'll do everything he can to keep Bobby Kennedy Jr. in his position as Health and Human Services Secretary. But I think Bobby Kennedy is not doing some of the things he thought he was going to do because of the pressure against him. And when members of Senate or House committees that investigate this, have medical doctors on these committees. These medical doctors, of course, are giving the medical spiel. They're not going to the science or the lack of science. They're simply going to the idea that vaccines are safe and effective and have saved millions and millions of lives, of which there's virtually no proof of that whatsoever. But in a memo that was obtained by Politico, the Republican leaders on February 11th that were polled, and the polling showed that the removing the vaccine liability shield is overwhelmingly popular among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. The memo included a graph depicting how up to 83% of voters oppose the liability shield, depending on the voter type. So Lyons, who was writing this article, who's the action president of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, said by embracing this policy reform, Congress can demonstrate commitment to improving vaccine safety without alienating any large voting bloc. An Arkansas State Senator Brian King said, I'm supportive of what Senator Paul's trying to do. In 2024, he introduced a bill that, if passed, would have made criminal penalties for drug and vaccine manufacturers that knowingly misled people and caused harm. That bill died last year under pressure from the pharmaceutical industry. Whoop, the volume went down again. Anyway, I thought this was all rather interesting because it's, as I said, it's so in your face, for crying out loud. As to who's on what side of this issue and who their greatest concern is. The money that comes into their election campaigns so they can go on living the lives of kings and princes and queens and priestesses. Or will they stand up for the safety of their constituents? I love things like this. All right, let's talk about coffee for a minute. What I'm about to tell you, I am not promoting the drinking of coffee. I have many patients who are coffee drinkers. And they read the news and they see that there's some headlines out there talking about how the drinking of coffee lowers dementia risk. And there's this study out of Harvard and MIT that points to that. And I want to talk about that study. But I also want to make a prediction. Coffee and tea was never an issue in the LDS Church until Heber J. Grant in the 1920s. And when Prohibition came out, then there was a much stronger attitude in the LDS Church against alcohol and coffee and tea. Prior to that, beer wasn't that big of a deal. Hard liquor was. As the word of wisdom says, barley drinks are okay. Well, barley drinks are beer. And it all kind of depends on how the trends go inside the church as to what's acceptable and isn't. When I was a freshman, well, when I started BYU in the late 60s and finished early 70s. And back then, Coca-Cola was as bad as alcohol. Now you can buy Coke on the campus at BYU. Things change over time. My problem with Coke is the sugar. Root beer. You know, any of these manufactured sodas, the problem is the sugar. Yeah, there's caffeine in some of these drinks. I don't think caffeine is the problem a lot of people think it is. In small amounts, because your brain has caffeine receptor sites. God made your brain with caffeine receptor sites. Why? Well, I guess we could argue that. But the fact is, you have nicotine receptor sites in your brain as well. God made coffee, God made nicotine. God did not make whiskey. Anyway, and I'm not talking about that. I'm trying to talk about coffee. So I have a prediction. just as the church has backed off in caffeinated sodas, where it's not encouraged, but it's not food either. I predict before this year is over, they're going to have the same attitude about coffee and tea. In other words, it's not going to be promoted. It's just not going to be talked about. And it's not going to be a part of the Temple Recommend interview. I predict that before the end of this year. Because the church is aware of the research coming out on coffee. That doesn't mean you can drink coffee all day long, but the research is showing 2, maybe 3 cups early in the day actually have a dementia prevention aspect to it. Now, new research that's published in the Journal of the American Medical Association is showing this a very strong reason to feel even better about even up to 3 or 4 espressos before the stock market opens in New York. Now, here's the short version of the findings. Take it for whatever you want. Caffeinated coffee was linked to a lower dementia risk. Where do you have the highest caffeine receptor sites in the body? Yes, in the brain. They're in the heart, but the greatest concentration is in the brain. And comparing the highest versus the lowest consumption groups, the study reported a hazard ratio that amounts to 95%, which simply means higher caffeinated coffee intake was associated with a lower risk of dementia. The people also reported less subjective cognitive decline. You can have cognitive decline without being diagnosed with dementia. The higher intake group had a 7.8% versus a 9.5% experience of lesser cognitive decline. And the sweet spot, in other words, how many cups, looked very moderate. The most pronounced differences showed up around 2 to 3 cups of coffee per day, of caffeinated coffee. Decaf coffee did not show a significant association with dementia risk. Only the caffeinated coffee. And the brain is loaded with caffeine receptor sites. So the long-running study, and I'm doing this for the benefit of my patients and K-Talk listeners who have taken the time to email me. You can do that at jackstockwelloffice@gmail.com. The staff passes these emails on to me, asking for clarification on coffee. The long-running study, led by researchers from Mass General Brigham and Harvard and the T.H. Chan School of Public Health at Harvard and the Broad Institute of MIT, tracked 131,000 U.S. adults. Did the commercial play at 7:20? I didn't see it come up, or maybe it doesn't come on until 8:20. Anyway, 131,000 adults for 4 decades, 40 years, and documented 11,000 dementia cases. One major finding was very clear. Adults who drank about 3 cups of coffee per day or 1 to 2 cups of tea had a much lower risk of dementia and more favorable cognitive outcomes over their lifetimes. Decaf did not show the same relationship. Now, both the male and the female participants who drank more than 3 cups of caffeinated coffee per day had an 18% lower risk of dementia, compared with those who reported little or no caffeine coffee consumption. So author Daniel Wang, the associate scientist with the Channing Division of Network Medicine in Mass General Brigham Department of Medicine, and an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, said this: When searching for possible dementia prevention tools, we thought something as prevalent as coffee may be a promising dietary intervention. Our unique access to high quality data through studies that have been going on for more than 40 years allowed us to follow through on that idea. And while our results are encouraging, it's important to remember that the effect size is small and there's lots of important ways to protect cognitive function as we age. Our study suggests that caffeinated coffee or tea consumption can be one piece of that puzzle. The cognitive upside of caffeinated coffee is clear. So now take it up a notch. Start with premium whole bean coffee, then level it up significantly with a smart blend of other ingredients, not the least of which would be medium chain fatty acid oils, ashwagandha. When I'm asked, are there things I should add for my brain? Yes, I like ginkgo, I like biloba, I like ashwagandha, but no one has asked me, is there something I can add to my coffee to make it more healthy for me? Well, if you're going to drink coffee and you want to make it healthier, you get a medium chain fatty, an MCT oil. Butter's a great one. What was the name of the coffee guy? I'll think of it. Begins with an A. David, whatever. 10 years ago or something like that, he came out talking about putting MCT oil in your coffee or putting butter in there. Make your good hot pot of coffee, put in a slab of butter, whip it up really good with your blender so that the fat of the butter is emulsified by the blending so it mixes evenly with the coffee instead of floating on top. And you make the coffee even healthier by doing that. That's fine. Medium chain fatty acids, another good thing to do. MCT oils, coconut oil. There's a lot of different kinds of oils that one could add to their coffee to make it even better. Now, again, I'm not saying go out and start drinking coffee if you haven't had coffee before. That's not the purpose of these few minutes this morning. The purpose of these few minutes this morning is to answer questions I get from patients. And I don't just answer questions that I'm in favor of. But I think these studies are very interesting, especially, I'm going to repeat myself again, your brain's loaded with caffeine receptor sites. What's a receptor site? In baseball, the players out in the field, the infield, the catcher all have receptor sites. They're called a mitt, a baseball catcher's mitt, a baseball mitt, to catch the ball. Because the ball is usually moving so fast, you can't catch it with your hand. Or you need to scoop it up if you've got something skimming across the surface of the infield or the outfield, and your fingers just aren't wide enough, so we have a baseball mitt to scoop up the ball. Well, when something is introduced into the body in the sense of nutrition, there are receptor sites that will accept that particular element. If there's no receptor site for it, it will have no effect. Let me give you an example of hormones, testosterone or estrogen, with a little boy or a little girl. Boys have as many receptor sites for testosterone spread throughout their bodies as girls have receptor sites for estrogen. And so when a little girl's ovaries start making estrogen at a higher level, their bodies start turning into a woman. And when a boy's testicles start making enough testosterone, they start turning into a man because there's certain parts of a man's body that has testosterone receptor sites. There's parts of a girl's body that has estrogen receptor sites. And let's just use the breasts as an example. Boys have the same breast tissue they're born with that girls are born with. It's just that girls' breast tissue are loaded with estrogen receptor sites. So when the estrogen is released, the breasts start to develop. In boys, if you give them a lot of estrogen, they're going to develop breasts. But boys don't have the same amount of estrogen as the girls don't have the same amount of testosterone. Thank goodness that balance that God created is still with us today so that we can have males and females. What is the brain doing with caffeine receptor sites? Parts of the brain are stimulated when caffeine is present in the human body by caffeine going into that receptor site, causing some kind of synaptic activity inside the cortex, inside the hippocampus, even in the survival areas of the amygdala are caffeine receptor sites. What are they doing there? Well, a little more research would probably help out to answer that question, but it's there. God put it there. Just as cannabinoids, marijuana. We have receptor sites for that in the brain. We have receptor sites for opium. Why are all these things there? Because I think to some degree, the creator of our bodies knew that all these things in a somewhat limited, moderate dose could have a beneficial effect on the body. So just keep that in mind. Can you overdo it? Of course you can overdo it. There are people who drink coffee all day long. As soon as their cup is empty, they go get another cup. That's not good. That's not good at all. All right, I think I made my point. Now, what time we got? Oh, plenty of time. I want to get to the best diet ever. I'm going to get to that. I may be able to start at this hour, certainly the next hour. I also want to mention to you that my half off special is still going. Boy, it's just, I saw 2 new patients yesterday. I saw 2 new patients Monday, taking advantage of this half off. Most of these people are coming from outside the Salt Lake City area. A couple of them are way up in, one's in Providence, one's in the Logan area. I saw 2 new patients Monday, both for headache migraine patterns that just recently started. One is a 14-year-old girl, and the other is an 89-year-old woman. Just recent onset of headache migraine pattern. And coupled with low back. There's almost a low back issue associated with migraines because they're both, the migraines and low back pain are caused by the same thing. So it's usually you see these things together. Be right back after the break. Well, there is a commercial for those of you on the stream. Good morning. I'm glad you're there. There is a commercial playing at K-Talk right now. So I want to get into another study that it's backed by 75 years of research. And the media apparently does not read this research, or they are heavily paid off not to talk about it. And so RFK, being the brave soldier that he is, in the sense of redefining the health profile of the human or of the American citizen, has been talking about schizophrenia being involved with grains, and that when you completely eliminate grain from the diet of someone suffering from schizophrenia, the schizophrenia goes away. Now that's really interesting. And so I want to get into that because of the research that backs it up. And I don't just talk about things like that. I have continued my I've continued my discussion with the people on the street while the commercial at K-Talk was playing. Anyway, my point is this: 75 years of research, and the media simply isn't talking about it. And that is the relationship between grain and brain disease. Now, occasionally, a member of the LDS Church who listens to this radio show and has heard me downplay grain all the time will occasionally say, Dr. Jack, you know the word of wisdom says wheat is for man. And then I have a standard answer for that. I said, yeah, it does say that. When was that published? And they usually don't know. I said, where was it published? They usually don't know. And I said it was published in 1836 in Kirtland, Ohio. Now, I want you to put on your thinking cap. How much control of wheat hybridization was going on in 1836 compared to today? How much of the wheat in 1836 was being sprayed by glyphosate as opposed to today? How many modifications of the wheat species introduced by man in 1836 compared to today? And then they start to get it. And I said, yeah, wheat for man, 1836, not 2026. Unless you can get some heritage type organic wheat, then you should be okay. If you get wheat products from Italy, you're probably okay, because Italy will not allow this stuff to take place in their grain market that we allow to take place here. An interesting thing about glyphosate is it's not only used as a pesticide herbicide, but they found out that when they spray crops a week or so before harvest with glyphosate, it dries them out. And that's what they want when they harvest this stuff. So that when the harvested material piles up, it's not loaded with moisture that will promote the growth of mold and bacteria. But the glyphosate's still there. So with that said, let's move to the number of researchers who have published peer-reviewed studies on diet and schizophrenia. You can go to PubMed, or you can go to, what's the other one? And put in search terms, diet and schizophrenia. And the number of peer-reviewed studies that will pop up is 0. Now, the journalists who are writing articles against what Bobby Kennedy Jr. had to say on this subject say that he's completely unfounded in what he's trying to say. But out of the other side of their mouth, they will not admit there's no science to say that he's wrong. So the story that's coming out on this subject, 75 years of peer-reviewed research, including double-blind studies published in 2025, link gluten-containing grains to schizophrenia in identifiable subpopulation. In other words, the 25 to 30% of patients with elevated anti-gliadin antibodies. You can find out if you think you have a gluten intolerance or a gluten allergy simply by a blood test. And they're looking for anti-gliadin antibodies. Now, they also found that ketogenic and grain-free diets have produced documented remissions of schizophrenia at Harvard, at Stanford, McLean Hospital, with multiple studies now underway or completed. No journalist who has covered Kennedy's remarks contacted any of these researchers. And when Kennedy was doing a press release or a press conference on this subject, He mentioned Harvard, Stanford, McLean, who have at one time or another participated in these studies over 75 years. None of the journalists who were grilling him at the press conference bothered to check with these sources. Now, The Dark Side of Wheat, very interesting book, shows that the harm from wheat extends way beyond gluten. And it identifies 6 categories of damage, including neurotoxicity, opioid receptor disruption, and excitotoxicity, across 335 peer-reviewed abstracts and 229 disease associations. Removing grains also eliminated chronic glyphosate exposure from pre-harvest desiccation. And that's what I've been talking about. To dry something out practically to powder is desiccate. Now, the media calls this science unfounded. What they should have said is that this science has been unread, ignored, covered over, swept under the rug. What they say, it's unfounded. So on February 4th of this month, Bobby Kennedy Jr. told a crowd at Tennessee State Capitol, "We now know that the things that you eat are driving mental illness in this country. Dr. Chris Palmer at Harvard has cured schizophrenia using keto diets. I have patients who've cured autism, ADHD, ADD in their children with ketogenic diets." Ketogenic meaning the creation of ketones. In other words, low carbohydrate diets, especially ultra-processed carbohydrates, which the supermarket is just full of. When these things were removed from their children's diets, when certain food dyes were removed from their children's diets, when MSG was removed from their children's diets, the children responded beautifully. Bobby Kennedy also said this: "There are studies right now that I saw 2 days ago where people lose their bipolar diagnosis by changing their diet." That is how sensitive the brain is to foreign elements that have no business inside of our bodies. But the food industry loads the foods we choose to eat with these chemicals to addict you to the product, to make you think that product is food, to make you enjoy that product, to make you think that that product is actually tasty and that you want more of it. And what it does is it poisons the brain. Now, at face value, the critics are correct about one thing. The word cure is a blunt instrument in psychiatry. And Kennedy's phrasing was rhetorically imprecise. I guess you could say that. But what followed was not careful scientific correction. It was simply what's called narrative erasure. In other words, the coverage collapsed decades of metabolic psychiatric research, ignored documented clinical remissions, and substituted appeal to authority dismissals for engagement with the real evidence that was right there in front of their noses. And what was framed as an unfounded claim, in fact, part of a 75-year body of research, the media simply chooses not to read. I have often talked on my health show about the therapeutic value of ketogenic diets for bipolar, for schizophrenia. I've done it several times in the past. For manic, the whole bipolar expression between depression and mania. Because the brain simply is being poisoned by the kinds of things that we eat. that we choose to eat that really aren't food. Or it started out with as food, but then was adulterated by the addition of all these chemicals. Now, within hours, here it was a couple of weeks ago of Secretary Kennedy's comment, the New York Times published a piece headlined, "Kennedy makes unfounded claim that keto diet can cure schizophrenia," followed rapidly by nearly identical framings in The Independent and in Raw Story. And the coverage quoted two Columbia University psychiatrists who say it's simply misleading and said flatly, there is currently no credible evidence that ketogenic diets can cure schizophrenia. Even though Kennedy, when he made these comments a couple of weeks ago in Tennessee, gave the sources of the research. He often does that. Whenever he's talking about something controversial, he almost always gives the source of the research. And he hardly ever talks about something that isn't supported by years, if not decades, of research. So I'm looking at the headlines here of the New York Times. Kennedy makes unfounded claim that keto diet can cure schizophrenia. The claim vastly overstates preliminary research into whether the high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet might help people with the disorder. Now, you need to pay careful attention to what's going on here. The media did not examine or bother to refute the underlying research. It sought the comment of two psychiatrists who have not conducted research on ketogenic therapy for schizophrenia, and just framed their authority-based dismissals as a fact check, and then just close the loop, just close the story right then and there, because these two known psychiatrists at Columbia say it's all a bunch of bunkum, who have not conducted research of their own. Now, the Times did not contact Dr. Christopher Palmer of Harvard affiliated McLean Hospital, whose published case studies Kennedy was directly referencing. The New York Times did not bother to contact Shabani Sethi of Stanford, who coined the term metabolic psychiatry and led the pilot clinical trial that produced a 32% reduction in psychiatric symptoms in schizophrenia patients on a ketogenic diet. It did not contact Dr. Deanna Kelly of the University of Maryland, whose research group just completed the first large-scale, double-blind, randomized controlled trial of a gluten-free diet in an AGA, IgG-positive schizophrenia patient. It did not contact Dr. Zoltan Sarnyai, whose formal research protocols for ketogenic metabolic therapy in schizophrenia was published in the Frontiers in Nutrition in 2024. In other words, the journalist did not interview a single researcher who has actually studied the question. And that refusal has become increasingly difficult to justify in light of what the scientific literature actually shows. And what follows is a demonstration that's grounded in 75 years of peer-reviewed evidence that the relationship between dietary metabolic intervention and schizophrenia spectrum remission is not unfounded. It is one of the most extensively documented and systematically ignored research trajectories in modern psychiatry. And because most people just fall back when someone with a white coat and a stethoscope hanging around their neck walks in the room, and they all fall not just silent, but stupid when the white coat speaks. Yeah, I said that. The earliest clinical research that has come out on this subject, 1951 to 1957, back when I was just a little tyke running around in diapers, and reports of the resolution of emotional disturbances following the initiation of a gluten-free diet exists in the medical literature as far back as 1951. In 1954, Schlesinger reported discovering 3 schizophrenics among a group of 32 adults who also happened to be suffering from celiac disease. So in 1957, Bosick, Wang, and Altersberg identified 5 psychotic patients among 94 patients with celiac disease. And the initial recognition of celiac disease is simply gluten sensitivity. And it occurred at a far higher prevalence among schizophrenics than in the general population. Now, I can go on with study after study after study that has been released on this information, but it's coming out in the press finally. But the immunological smoking gun, and we're going to go to a break here really quick with K-Talk because the news is going to pop on here shortly. But I'm going to continue this with those of you who are on the stream. If you want to hear this, you go to youtube.com/drjackstockwell. But the smoking gun, in 2011, a study in the Schizophrenia Bulletin found that persons with schizophrenia had 700% higher prevalence of antibodies related to celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. 700%. The 2010 study in schizophrenia research demonstrated that this immune response to gliadin in schizophrenics was distinct from celiac disease itself, occurring without the antibodies that show up, meaning that conventional celiac testing would miss it entirely. We'll be right back after the break at K-Talk. So now I just put K-Talk on mute. For those of you listening on the stream, I hope you find this interesting because this is very typical in the media. Because a lot of people get their news from the media. And what was that famous statement of Mark Twain? If you read the morning papers, you're misinformed. If you listen to the evening news, you're malinformed. I really like that. I have that on a little post-it on the front of my computer screen in another location. I love that. If you read the morning papers, you're misinformed. If you listen to the evening news, you're malinformed. Yeah, I do like that. Now, I want to go through some more of what's hiding behind all of this for those of you who are on the stream. And it's in the convergence of multiple studies that tells the important story that the news writers completely ignore and do not pay any attention to. Now, there it goes. And that's approximately 25 to 30% of all schizophrenia patients carry elevated anti-gliadin antibodies of the IgG type, a rate that is significantly higher than the less than 10% prevalence in healthy controls. In other words, there could be anywhere from 3 to 4 times a greater incidence of these particular antibodies in schizophrenics than in those who do not suffer from schizophrenia. Now, that's not a marginal finding. It identifies a clinically actionable subpopulation comprising 1 in 3 schizophrenia patients who may be experiencing immune-mediated neurological damage simply triggered by nothing more than wheat proteins. Now, long before the clinical trials that started in the 2020s, there was this comprehensive synthesis of the wheat disease literature called The Dark Side of Wheat, a clinical appraisal of the role of wheat in human disease. Now, it's a monograph, but it draws upon decades of peer-reviewed research across immunology, toxicology, neurology, gastroenterology, and its central thesis was and remains profoundly disruptive to mainstream nutritional orthodoxy in that celiac disease is not an aberrant reaction to a wholesome food, but the most visible expression of a species-wide intolerance to wheat that affects virtually everybody to some degree. Now, how can it affect everybody, but not everybody is schizo? Because there are different areas in which it affects the body, as I was talking about. It can suppress your immune response. You could have a bigger portion of pizza some Friday or Saturday night, and all of a sudden Monday you got a cold. Is there a relationship? Could be. You have big pasta night with American-made pasta at a party, at the restaurant, whatever else. And a day or two later, you have serious stomach cramps. Can I prove that? No. No, but there are studies out there that show that relationship exists. Is it definitive, concrete proof? No. But it's worth looking into. You have pizza, pasta, some other manufactured carbohydrate, and I'm not talking about fruits or vegetables. I'm talking about manufactured carbs. And all of a sudden, the cramping is so bad you think you're going to die a day or two later, maybe an hour or two later. What was it? Was it the covering of the pizza, the tomato sauce, the pepperoni, or was it the wheat, the hybridized wheat that went into that dough? It's very difficult to tell. There are ongoing studies, nothing that nails it down to where we can absolutely point a finger at some causative agent, but it's damn interesting. Now, this monograph that I'm referring to builds on what's referred to as a celiac iceberg. What do we know about icebergs? 10% of it's above the water, 90% of it's hidden. Because it's a big ice cube. You put an ice cube in a glass of water, 10% of it's above the water, 90% is underwater. So what would a celiac iceberg imply? The gross gastrointestinal symptoms, some of which are silent, some of which are latent, detectable only by blood tests, are very difficult to trace to the dietary origin. Neurological, psychiatric, dermatological. What about the explosion of eczema and psoriasis? What about the explosion of rheumatoid arthritis? Psoriatic skin problems, autoimmune disorders. Who bothers to take time to relate them back to a possible dietary origin? And that's the whole idea of the submerged iceberg. There's something buried there. There's something buried there that's very difficult to see, as it is to see in the buried part of the iceberg. Right? Those of you who are listening at K-Talk, welcome back. I'm talking about the dark side of wheat and the fact that it should have no place whatsoever in your diet. That was part of that conversation as I was referring to in the last hour with a member of the LDS Church who was pointing out to me, Section 89, that word of wisdom, that wheat was for man. And I said, yeah, wheat. It didn't say bread, it said wheat. It didn't say bread is for man. Well, bread's the staff of life. Well, it says who. So whenever I can get my patients off of wheat, then there's six distinct categories of harm. And I'm going to finish with this because there's a lot more I can go into, but I don't want this to get boring. But at the same time, I want you to understand you're hurting yourself by eating modern day wheat. Now, someone out there right now is saying, yeah, but what if we get the organic, hard winter red wheat and we grind it and make bread out of it? You're probably just fine. I'm talking about commercial breads and commercial flours. I'm not talking about the wheat that Mother Nature made. I'm talking about the wheat that man made. Man doesn't make wheat to make you healthier. Man makes forms of wheat to make money, just as any other industry is based. Now, I was going to go into the 6 areas of we know that gliadin, one of the active proteins in wheat, destroys intestinal tissue, not only in people suffering from celiac disease, but non-celiac victims. There was a landmark study back in 2007 in Gut, a peer-reviewed gastroenterology publication, shows that gliadin will trigger the immune response so that you have an autoimmune effect on the lining of the gut. Your immune system will attack the gut wall. Why? 85–86% of your immune system is in the gut wall. It's not in your lymph system. It's not in the lymphatic nodes. It's not floating through the bloodstream, although your immune system is there. The vast majority of the immune system lines the gut because nature doesn't trust you to eat correctly. So it has this constant ongoing police force lining the gut. Well, as you have seen in live macroscopic studies of police getting out of hand, as you've seen with some members of ICE lately, so can your immune system. Number 2, the increase of intestinal permeability. In other words, things getting across the intestinal wall into the bloodstream that don't belong there, that should have been stopped. This is the leaky gut idea. Number 3, active opioid particles will pass through the blood-brain barrier and activate opioid receptors in the brain. It's called grain brain. Number 4, direct tissue damage by the wheat germ agglutinin. It's a lectin capable of penetrating the blood-brain barrier through a process called endocytosis, just from outside the cell going into the cell. And then there's what's called molecular mimicry, in which the 33 amino acid gliadin peptide shares very close structural identity with other kinds of bacteria. And then there's the endoexcitotoxicity, which exceptionally high levels of glutamic and aspartic acid, which activates receptor sites in the brain that should be calm, and they go a little bit crazy. Then there's the opioid dimension. I don't have time to get into that. There's 335 abstracts, 229 disease associations, and counting, associating gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity, gluten toxicity to various conditions in the body. And these people who are saying that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is speaking unfounded comments are just lying to your face, because that's what the role, essentially the role of the New York Times is to promote business interests and political interests. And usually when I find out something that the Wall Street Journal is really promoting, it's usually coming from the dark side. All right, I think that's enough of that subject. The best way to deal with this is you stop all wheat products, any and all wheat products. Just cut them out of the diet. It's not just bread. It's not just pizza dough or dinner rolls or hot dog buns. Read the labels. You'll find wheat in soups. Most cereals, even corn-based cereals, will have some wheat in it. It's not that hard to find. And when you find it, it's practically everywhere. So the relationship, let me just finish with this. The relationship between wheat and gluten, metabolic dysfunction, schizophrenia is not new. What Kennedy said was not unfounded. It's very well founded in studies that go back as early as 1951. And in a research trajectory spanning 75 years, and I have a list of the publications here: Science, Biological Psychiatry, the Schizophrenia Bulletin, Translational Psychiatry, Schizophrenia Research, the Journal of Immunology, Psychiatry Research, Frontiers in Nutrition, Frontiers in Pharmacology, and the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, among others, have published peer-reviewed studies on the absolute danger of wheat and its effect on the brain and several other systems in the body. As I say with a bunch of other health revelations, this should be front page news. Your kids are overactive, they can't settle down in school. Yeah, let's give them Ritalin. Maybe get rid of the wheat-based cereals they're eating in the morning. Get rid of the wheat-based breads they're eating with toast and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You know, this is a full-time job, as I've mentioned many times. A full-time job for one person in a family of 4, to stop the poisoning of our children's and our spouses' brains as well as our own, because of the tons of crap that the food labeling laws allow to take place in our foods, not to nourish us, but to addict us to that food product, is simply why it's there. Now, there's a more insidious side of it that I don't want to go into. Just enough that it poisons the brain. And a book out there, Grain Brain, it's a good place to start. But the evidence that Bobby Kennedy Jr. was referring to is no longer preliminary. The media institutions simply are not ready to hear it. And those that might be, in the sense of investigative journalism, which there's hardly any left anywhere, except, through Substack and the alternative media, as long as they're paid to continue the status quo that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is out of his mind, he's unfit to be in his position, he's not a medical doctor, thank goodness. He has no business being in charge of health and human services. He's a juggernaut. His family doesn't like him. His family rejects his positions on vaccines. What's his position on vaccines? Not that he's anti-vaccine. He's been vaccinated. His children have been vaccinated. He blames his hyperactivity children on the vaccines. What he's asking for is safety studies. And there aren't any safety studies. None. Why go to the time and expense of a safety study when you can't be sued for your unsafe materials you produce? All right. I think I'm beating a dead horse here. If your children are overactive, look and see how much wheat they're consuming. If they have cognitive problems, if they're designated as slow or behind by their school counselors, look for the wheat. If they have aggressive behavior that wasn't there a while ago, but suddenly they're getting very aggressive, watch and look for the wheat. And I'm going to add one more. You see that this big shooting that just happened in Rhode Island, who did it? A trans, loaded with chemicals, loaded with poisons to help them continue to believe that they're trans. I don't think I need to say anything more about that, but I would look for the wheat, except he's dead. He had a second weapon and he used the second weapon on himself. Or herself. Started out as a him to become a her. I don't need to tell you my position on that. Anyway, I hope this is informative. I hope you're getting something out of this, because your firsthand experience, your firsthand investigation, your firsthand methodologies that you employ for your own family's health absolutely matters. And if you will remove gluten-containing grains from your diet, your physical and mental health will improve. No fast check can override what your body is telling you. You don't have to go out and get extensive autoimmune tests or blood tests or all the regular labs that might be ordered. You will notice you can think clearly more so. Your memory improves. I told that to a patient, this 89-year-old patient I just started on for migraines. You should have seen her stand up straight. I just love that. I just love that when I take care of somebody for the first time and all of a sudden they stand up straight. They feel like they just grew an inch. And I told her then, like I tell most patients, I want you to examine your diet, because your diet may be contributing to your symptoms. Because there's way too many headache migraine people out there running around, way too many, who did not necessarily suffer some kind of trauma to the spine, bad car accident, fall, or whatever else, preceding the onset of those symptoms. It may simply be the accumulated toxicity from gluten. What has gluten in it? Wheat, rye, primarily wheat and rye. Some oats, but not, just look at it carefully. It's not in rice, just basically wheat-based products. Be careful. The evidence, as I said, is no longer preliminary. The evidence is no longer hypothetical. It is overwhelming, all the way back to 1951. Now, can you eat your way out of this? Ha! That's what I want to talk about next. Whoops, the commercial's playing. I was talking over the commercial again. I got to get better at that. So, I want to spend the rest of the show talking about what I consider to be the best diet. And for those of you on the stream, good morning, Dr. Jack. Psychiatrists are the predators of the medical profession. Safe and effective psychiatric care is the most predatory part of the medical system. Wendell, you might be right, buddy. If you want to make a comment, And if you're on the stream, you'll see where you can make a comment. I'll try to bring it into the show and try to answer your direct questions when you do that. All right, we're back on, and I want to spend some time. I want to spend the rest of the hour, because I think I covered all the stuff I wanted to. Coffee, vaccine immunity, grain cause schizophrenia, and the best diet. What is the best diet out there? Is it semaglutide? Is it tirzepatide? Is it Wegovy, Mounjaro? Or is it something else? And you know, I'm always trying to push the things that Mother Nature created. And you've all heard the same story. You know, a heart patient with clogged arteries has this bypass surgery. They're put on several powerful drugs. They're instructed to take lots of synthetic vitamin E, CoQ10, niacin. They start this intensive cardiac rehabilitation exercise program, and they begin a new life on this extreme low-fat diet, a la Dean Ornish or Nathan Pritikin. And they sacrifice every day. They sacrifice their once love of food for now, which is essentially tasteless, but they stick with it. And after all, their life depends on it. My cardiologist said I have to give up salt and I have to give up fat, and I just have to have this tasteless diet the rest of my life. And then after, a year and a half of that ridiculous diet, they're experiencing chest pains. They feel very depressed. They've lost some weight, which they were looking for. But as the chest pains get worse, they undergo another heart catheterization, and they find out, aghast at the results, that the arteries are now plugged even worse than they were a year and a half before. And in a nutshell, these failures are a result of several factors. One may be the array of cardiac drugs, which in turn will turn the patient into a cardiac invalid. Another may be I want to mention, a young man in his 60s was in the clinic yesterday getting the supplements I told him to make his heart work better. Not cure his heart disease, not cure anything, just to help his heart work better. 3 months ago, with a echocardiogram, they found out that his ejection fraction was 20%. In other words, every time the left ventricle pumped blood into the aorta, 80% of it stayed behind. Only 20% of it made it up the tube into the aorta, to the brain and the rest of the body. If you have an ejection of 20%, you need to get your affairs in order, because you're not going to be around much longer. His latest test, his ejection fraction was 40%. It doubled in 3 months. He was as happy as he could be in the office yesterday. What do I do now? Keep doing what you're doing. Let's go to 60%, because 60% is considered normal. And I said, what did your cardiologist blame it on? 100% improvement in ejection fraction. Oh, on his blood thinner. It was his blood thinner that did it. Yep. So anyway, what's causing this problem in people who get the bypass, 2, 3, 4, quadruple, whatever, and then all of us, or just stents, only to find out a year and a half later on these ridiculous diets, the situation's even worse than it was before. And they'll blame it on the stent, or they'll blame it on, but not the diet. And then, of course, the drugs that can turn a heart victim into a cardiac invalid. Another may be the synthetic nutrients that they're told to take, which do no good at all. In fact, they're harmful. A third may be the depressed state of mind that's brought on by this ridiculous low-fat diet, because your brain can't work without fats. Or the deterioration, I mean, may be due to a diet that can be disastrous, especially in this particular case, where they're worse off than they were a year earlier. The opposite of this result is shown by a fellow who had a bad liver with grossly elevated liver enzymes, 4 to 5 times normal, as shown on his labs. He had early diabetes with blood glucose levels around 180. That's fasting, 180. His blood pressure was around 175 over 100. Weighed 300 pounds. And instead of the usual medical routine, he opted for a natural protocol. Instead of synthetic nutrients, he started on a program of whole food supplements, like the ones I just got through telling you about this fellow yesterday. And instead of the cardiac rehab exercises, which in and of themselves aren't bad, the patient began a routine of first walking, then deep breathing, and then slow burn weight training. And most important, instead of the radical low-fat diet, he started what I consider the best diet to correct for metabolic imbalance. I don't care if I'm dealing with grossly obese or anorexic on the other end, or some kind of neurological problem, Parkinson's especially, or some kind of metabolic imbalance that's causing severe liver and kidney problems. I always suggest the same exact diet, the Mediterranean blood type diet. And like thousands of our patients, the results are radically different from this average heart patient I started this out with. Usually within 6 months, strictly following the Mediterranean diet, the blood results, the blood labs, radically different. Liver enzymes are normal. Blood sugar is normal. Blood pressure drops. In this one particular patient I have in mind, dropped to 130 over 72. Lost over 60 pounds of weight. More than 5% of the body fat was now gone. And then critical to these kinds of results was the foods that this person was consuming. And when it comes to the right way to eat, there's no one way that's correct for everybody, of course. And that's why so many heart patients, given the universal low-fat diet, will get worse. Your heart needs fat. Your brain needs fat. So the Pritikin or Ornish diets will kill you. I didn't say that. I take that back. Let me say it this way. The Pritikin, Ornish, low-fat diets, and there's other ones out there, will not give you the results you're looking for. Let me put it that way. So how should you eat? Did you know that there are 2 things that give better results in preventing heart attacks than the all-new stuff they've got, the cholesterol-lowering drugs? If you increase your intake of pure water, not RO water, not purified water, pure water, mountain glacial water, mountain stream water, spring water, well water that's been filtered, you can reduce your odds of a heart attack by more than 50% if you don't do anything more than, even without the exercise. One of my friends, and I always have a good laugh about, I take care of a lot of Greeks. And I love Greek salad. I could eat a Greek salad every single day with good olive oil and really strong apple cider vinegar or some other red wine vinegar or some other organic vinegar to go with that olive oil. I just love Greek salads. And he eats something called a Greek breakfast. You know what that is? His dad would have practically a bowl of coffee, some crusty, fresh baked bread, organic wheat bread that's soaked with olive oil, a dish of raw yogurt, and a handful of olives. Do you like Kalamata olives? I love. To me, they're like candy. I love Kalamata olives that are, of course, sustained in good quality organic olive oil. I could eat Kalamata olives every day. But I just love olives anyway. I don't care if they're green, black, or something in between. I love olives. And so this is what he would eat. And I think his current age is somewhere in his mid-90s, and he's out walking every day. And he eats the Mediterranean diet, which is simply the healthiest diet in the world. Better than South Beach, better than most of the rest. And the things, well, let me put it this way. What exactly should you be eating? Now, there's variances to this, and there are exceptions to this. But by and large, I would say 90-95% of people who will eat this diet, their brain will clear up, their skin will clear up, their sex drive will return, and they'll lose weight. I wonder if that's worth it. Because what you want to eat, if you want to start feeling better, is real food. How about a salad with hearts of romaine, arugula, garden fresh tomatoes, peppers, red cabbage, spinach, olives, sweet red onions, feta cheese, tossed with extra virgin first pressed olive oil, balsamic vinegar, a touch of Celtic sea salt, and fresh crushed organic black pepper. Oh. How about other foods like grilled fish? Pasta puttanesca. A good Italian restaurant can get that for you. Make sure that if you're out in a restaurant eating Italian foods, the pasta came from Italy. If the pasta didn't come from Italy, be careful. Bean soup, grilled vegetables, lean red meats, farm fresh eggs, a nice sweet peach or a pear, sun-dried tomatoes, olive oil with crushed pepper, and pasta, Italian pasta sprinkled with fresh Parmesan. Those are whole foods. Oh, now wait a second, Jack. Pasta isn't a whole food. Yeah, it is. If it comes from organic semolina, especially if it came from Italy, because Italy will not allow crap to be sprayed on their grains like we do here. And then you compare this with this bizarre low-fat, like the Dean Ornish night out on the town dinner. The salad consists of Caesar salad with no croutons, no dressing, no Parmesan cheese, just a handful of romaine lettuce leaves. Ugh. And for the main course, you eat steamed vegetables with a scoop of plain white rice. There's no oil, there's no coffee, there's no dessert, and the beverage is probably tap water. The dinner's low fat. It's supposed to be heart healthy. Unfortunately, most of the critical nutrients like carotenoids will not be absorbed since fat's needed for these nutrients to get into the bloodstream. It's like you eat a carrot. How much fat is in a carrot? Not much at all. But you want the food value of what's in that organic carrot, you have to have fat, because the best organic or the best nutritional support that a carrot can provide is fat-based. And if you don't have fat-based foods along with that carrot, it's going to go right on through you. And far more important is the question, how long can you eat a diet like that before you're depressed, tired, ready to quit, and ready to kill somebody? Why not try the Mediterranean diet instead? There are so many publications on it. There are YouTube videos on it. There are books on it, studies, various programs that you can follow to study this. And why is the Mediterranean diet so important? Well, it mimics the Japanese coastal diets where the lowest rates of cancer are found, but the next lowest rates of cancer, you hear about the blue zones around the planet, where the people are living into their 80s, 90s, and 100s with apparently disease-free, the blue zones. One of the largest blue zones is the Mediterranean coast. They're eating, they grow their vegetables year-round. They grow their fruit year-round. They eat out of the ocean. And whatever meats they eat are usually lamb or beef, maybe some poultry, that's running loose all over the hillsides, eating fresh foods from the hillside. Now, when considering any diet, you got to realize that not everybody is created equal. And I got to be careful here because Cake Talk's going to go to a break here in a second, but not everybody's equal. Some people are fast metabolizers. Some people are very slow metabolizers. Some people get their energy out of their food an hour after they ate it. Some people, you're not going to get it till the next day. So therein lies some of the rub with these other diets. There's the Zone, there's the Atkins, Sugar Busters, the Eads, Dr. Eads, both husband and wife, doctors, Protein Power, a good diet in and of itself. I consider these emergency measure type things before you, or to get out of a metabolic crisis and then move into the Mediterranean. But you kind of want to consider your blood type. I've been asked about this all the time. Is there any truth? Is there any value to the blood type diet? I've got lots of experience with patients, not my own. I'm an O positive. One of the advantages of being O positive blood is that there's O positive blood everywhere. You can't have anybody else's blood. You can't have any of the other types. If you need blood and you're O positive, you have to have O positive. But like I said, O positive is everywhere. So if you're O positive and you're needing blood, you're probably okay. I think it's AB negative, if I remember right. We'll be right back. All right, commercial started at K-Talk. So I want to get into the blood types. The basics of the blood type are that people have different metabolic needs that relate to, among other things, their blood type. Type O, type A, type B, and type AB. And while the blood type diet doesn't help everybody, it does combine the main concepts of the Mediterranean diet, and it's helpful to just about everybody. I mean, you're going to feel better, you're going to get healthier, you're going to lose weight, and you're going to get stronger. You're going to get stronger if for no other reason than the fact that you feel more energized and you're out walking around. Or you get yourself a little mini tramp, or you actually start some slow burn resistance training. And every time I talk about slow burn resistance training, I have this flood of guilt come over me because I need to do that, and I haven't been doing it because I'm lazy. But I know my body needs it. But because of the diet, I've lost 20 pounds since the 1st of December, just cleaning up my diet. I probably could have lost 30 by now if I had been doing some slow burn weight training. I have access to to what's involved with slow burn weight training. And I think it was last week's health show that I was explaining what slow burn is. And it's not that big of a mystery. It's just where you're exercising muscles that don't get a chance to rest. So I want to talk about that to the K-Talk audience as well. And as soon as we're back on, I'll mention that to the K-Talk audience as well. And so I don't want to just exclusively to the stream. So those of you at K-Talk back on the air, I want to get into blood type because Dr. Sears, who was really pushing that, is kind of fallen off the map a little bit because it applies to a good group of people, but not everybody. So it didn't get all the hype that it needed. Most of us know our blood type. And the book is called Eat Right for Your Type. I think it's still in publication. Very interesting book. I started following it when it came out because it made sense. Based on your blood type as well as other kinds of metabolic markers, different foods react to people differently. Now, the blood type O, you are more of a carnivore by nature. You need to consume high protein foods like meat and fish. Fruits and vegetables are good, but you need to limit your intake of grains and beans and legumes. And if you're overweight, here are the things you need to avoid if you're type O. Wheat, corn, beans, lentils, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower. You want to go easy on seafood, but seafood is great. Liver is good. Red meat is good. Celtic sea salt. Interestingly enough, kale, that I find to be one of the most boring of foods, but kale, broccoli, spinach are all beneficial foods if you're type O. If you're type A, you're more of a natural vegetarian. That doesn't mean to be vegetarian. You just might have more benefit from a vegetarian-oriented diet. Vegetables, grains, beans, legumes, fruits, some seafood, but you can overdo that. And if you're overweight and you need to avoid lots of meat, lots of dairy, kidney beans, wheat, and lima beans. Who in the world likes lima beans? I can just see it right now. Oh, I was in the 3rd grade, sitting there at the dinner table all by myself in Lexington Park, Maryland. And for some reason, my mother, who might be listening to this program this morning, had a slight break from reality and fixed lima beans for dinner. Oh, I don't know if Dad wanted them or what. To me, eating a lima bean was like eating a raw snail. You crack open the shell and pull that little bug out of there and eat it raw. I'd rather do that than eat a lima bean. I was not allowed to leave the dinner table. And I had a scout meeting to get to. I was a new Cub Scout. And I had a scout meeting to get to, but I couldn't go because I didn't finish the lima beans. So I had this ingenious idea. And again, if my mother's listening, she knows some of the other ingenious ideas I've had in my life, very similar to this. That if I hid the lima beans, I could say I ate them. So I actually started throwing them around the kitchen, into the sink, onto the floor. We had a dog, but the dog didn't like lima beans. I don't think any living creature would like a lima bean. But And then I finally said, they're all gone, but by this time it was too late to go to Scouts. I think my mother must have found the beans because it satisfied my dad. I could get down from the table. He wasn't necessarily a bean researcher or explorer, but I think my mother found them and probably threw them away and didn't expose me. But that's how much I hate lima beans. But apparently it's good for type A blood types. For type B, you're a balanced omnivore. That means you can metabolize all kinds of food. Meat, dairy, grain, beans, legumes, fruits, vegetables, all good for you. Chicken may not be the best for you. And if you have a weight problem, stay away from corn, wheat, lentils, peanuts, sesame seeds, and buckwheat. You know, buckwheat is not a wheat. Buckwheat does not have gluten in it. Buckwheat is a very healthy food. Then there's type AB, where you're an omnivore in moderation. You can eat most foods, just not as freely as a type O. For you, meat, seafood, dairy, tofu, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, legumes can all be consumed beneficially. If you have a weight problem, you want to be careful with red meat, kidney and lima beans, seeds, corns, and buckwheat. And those are just generalized type of things that may or may not have a direct application for you. But as I started off, the case history started off here a while ago talking about this particular subject, that Americans with the support of well-meaning but very ill-informed physicians and nutrition advisors are still on this ridiculous low-fat craze that has been disproved thousands of times, even essentially what could be considered modern-day research. And it continues, and as it continues, Americans are becoming sicker and sicker. You see that Bobby Kennedy Jr. just turned the food pyramid upside down, like it should have been done a long time ago. Now, the low-fat diets are combined with other factors to produce a syndrome, which is rapidly becoming epidemic in this country, which has given birth to these GLP-1 agonist drugs. Obesity, abnormal liver function, high cholesterol, high triglyceride levels, elevated levels of insulin because of insulin sensitivity, a predisposition to blood clotting, hormonal imbalances, and a tendency of all these factors to combine slowly but surely to choke off the blood vessels that feed the heart. And what is the most common health problem Americans suffer from today after decades of promoting low-salt, low-fat diets? Clogged arteries and heart disease, of course. And the solution to these kinds of problems is not a low-fat diet, which is just a cruel hoax in medical circles. And here's why. The medical media has infused in us this concept that fat is the enemy and low fat is better. Fully 81% of school children now think that the most healthy diet is one that eliminates fat. It can only be called a death sentence diet. The typical low-fat fare, the typical low-fat type, filled with all kinds of these new high-tech, low-fat ice creams, low-fat yogurts, low-fat potato chips, low-fat cheese, low-fat pretzels, low-fat cookies, that just cause you to get fatter. And as weight increases, the good cholesterol drops, the bad cholesterol increases, triglyceride levels raise, insulin levels raise and hardly go down at any time in a 24-hour period. And the process continues unchecked, and it's the exact prescription for thickening blood vessels, choking off blood supply to the heart, feeling weak, turning purple, collapsing and having your heart stop for good. I could sugarcoat this, but I don't have time, and I don't think you'd hear me. Studies prove that eating low-fat diets causes the body to become more fat at a dramatically increased rate as it stores more of the fat that it can possibly get. And why is that? Because when you have a low-fat diet, you have a high-carb diet. When you have a high-carb diet, you have high insulin levels. And insulin's number one job is to store fat. Its second job is to get blood sugar out of the blood into the cells. But its number one job is to store energy in the form of fat. And unlike the studies proving this fact, there is no proof at all that eating a high-fat diet causes obesity. No proof of that whatsoever. And then oxidation, we know about the oxidation of fats that can cause cancer. Yet despite public opinion, saturated fats like red meat and dairy does not oxidize easily. Fully 41% of all physicians that were polled in one particular study were under the mistaken belief that saturated fat is the oxidation culprit in cancer. In fact, the newfangled fake fats and the low-fat concoctions are the real culprits because mankind has been eating saturated fats from time immemorial. Before there was cancer, before there was heart disease, to the levels you see it today. Where did all this come from? Where did this explosion of heart disease and cancer come from? As I have mentioned many times, I'll mention it again. You go back to cdc.gov and look at the census reports decade after decade of the most common diseases. If you go to 1910, I think cancer is listed as 10. Heart disease isn't even on there. Along with an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, like a daily 2 teaspoons of raw flax oil. I take 4 flax oil B6 capsules every morning with my morning supplements. They're at the office. Several of my patients have started doing the same thing. Just 4 flax oils every morning. It's not a whole lot of oil, but it builds up. And it's the omega-3 that my brain and my heart needs. I might even start taking 6. Because studies show that 2 to 3 years of the consumption of monounsaturated fats, which flax oil is, less markers in the blood related to liver, kidney, or brain problems. All the low-fat, zero cholesterol concoctions that are out there are unethical products and a disaster for your heart and your health. And that's why the olive oil-rich Mediterranean diet has the healthiest balance of omega fats, and it contains no trans fats at all. And any frying that is done on the Mediterranean diet is fried in butter or lard. No trans fats at all. Now, we're kind of running out of time because I could talk for another hour on this subject. But interestingly, we know that coastal Japanese live longer than anybody else. Do you know what country has the longest lifespan after Japan? Spain, the largest producer of olive oil. There is a favorite restaurant that I like to go to. And most Italian restaurants are the same as this one. They will serve you bread up front. And sitting there on the table is olive oil and usually balsamic vinegar. I can make a meal out of that by itself, if as long as the olive oil is good. We're going to go to a break here with the K-Talk group. I am still doing the half-off special for brand new patients. You call 801-523-1890, 801-523-1890. Schedule yourself for a consultation with me. It's free. If you want me to take care of you, I will. But my goodness, the stuff that we're seeing coming essentially out of the woodwork, now that I cut the initial fees in half. And they're coming from out of state, not just the local people. Headaches, migraines, back problems, sciatica, digestive problems, nervous system problems, neurological problems, skin problems, even reproductive problems will respond when the pressure on the brainstem is released from that upper cervical correction. Again, I thank you all for the opportunity to be here, especially on the K-Talk forum. I'll be back again next Monday with an update. Hopefully, we are not at war with Iran by then. And in the meantime, give good consideration to the things that I'm talking about. What I do and what I talk about is in answer to emails that I get at jackstockwelloffice.com, at gmail.com, and to the patients that I see. I have new patients I'm seeing today, as well as some follow-ups with regulars. And they're always asking questions. The number one question I get now, Dr. Jack, are you going to retire? No, I will probably die over the top of somebody I'm taking care of in my clinic, because this is just too much fun to give up. Might cut back on hours, but it's just too much fun, the fun that we have, both on the nutritional and the structural end of taking care of people. And that's the main goal that we have in the clinic, is to take care of the people. So I just want to thank those who have come in through the K-Talk audience that we have been able to help. And I appreciate your loyalty. I appreciate your recommendations to other people, because I don't advertise. I talk about it on my radio show, but there's no advertisement outside of that. We are a referral-based practice. Everybody I've seen 4 new patients this week so far. Every one of them, referral. So at K-Talk, thank you. I will see you all Monday. And for those of you on the stream, if you can like and refer, subscribe, it helps the algorithm. And I will see you all Monday as well. Thank you for being a